Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, July 20th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Georgia and its upcoming Senate and governor elections that don't exactly come across as something that is uniform. Right now, what we find in both the governor's and Senate race is that they are moving in opposite directions. What do I mean by that? Well, in the U.S. Senate race, Raphael Warnock, the incumbent Democratic senator, is currently leading his Republican opponent, Herschel Walker, by an average of 1.3%. Now, this comes after months of being down in the polls up until recently when Warnock's numbers started to climb to about 49% in terms of overall support. However, despite the Senate election going towards the Democratic Party in terms of its margin in the polls, the governor election is much more lopsided in favor of the Republican Party, with Brian Kemp maintaining about a 6.3% lead with 52% of the vote on average. Now, in any normal swing state, you rarely ever see ticket splitting to this extent, including states such as Georgia. When you saw the governor election back in 2018, what you found was that in many other races down the ballot, some of them even had to head off into a runoff election, most notably the Secretary of State election, because of how close it was. Georgia was a close state in 2018, regardless of the race you looked at, with very few exceptions, and Democrats did better here than they had in decades across the state. But fast forward to 2022, it seems as if the governor and Senate elections are moving in different directions, despite the Georgia governor election having the same exact candidates as 2018, and the Georgia Senate election having a very similar level of candidates in this election 1 year later, following the first election that got Raphael Warnock in the Senate in the first place in January of 2021. It's quite a fascinating spectacle to see that voters in this state are willing to elect a Democratic senator and elect, or re-elect rather, a Republican governor, despite both of them disagreeing with each other on so much. The interesting thing about it all is that Raphael Warnock was actually handpicked by Stacey Abrams to be the Senate nominee. She was the one that really got him to enter into the race and boosted his candidacy. For a brief period of time, some people even thought that the Georgia Senate election in the runoff might not even make it to have two Republicans in that race, rather than one Democrat and one Republican. But the Democrats seemed to unify very shortly behind Warnock in that eventual race, and they bolstered him to the U.S. Senate. This governor election, on the other hand, has practically been determined to be a rematch between Kemp and Abrams, since the Republicans were angry. But they knew that there was a sign that she was going to run again. Now, the year 2018 and 2022, both of which I can't say can be compared. They are very different years, 2018 being a blue wave, 2022 expected to be a red wave. And I'm not surprised by the governor election results, but rather what surprises me are the Senate election results. The title of this video comes from the mere shock that there could be so many crossover voters. And it's not just that. These are not the only things that are a little bit off about this race. You see how Brian Kemp is ahead by 6.3%? Well, a new poll was released today that has not been internal. Yet the Republican internal shows Brian Kemp leading amongst different minority groups. Keep in mind that rarely ever happens for a Republican, but he's only winning by 5. The average of nonpartisan polls shows Brian Kemp with a larger lead than some of his own internals. But one thing is consistent, internal or not, the governor's race is a lot more conservative than the Senate race. Looking at the Senate race here, let's compare them. Fabrizio Lee and Associates, Warnock is ahead by 3. In the governor's race, Kemp is ahead by 7. Data for Progress, Kemp plus 9. Democrats in the Senate race, Walker is only up by 2. Plus 2 versus plus 9, that's about a 7-point fall off. For Fabrizio Lee and Associates, that's about a 10-point fall off. Chains Research, Warnock up by 4, Abrams, I guess we don't have a number for that. Quinnipiac University, an A- rated pollster, what you find is that Warnock is ahead by 10 here, but in the Senate and governor's race for the GOP and the Democrats. And even in Herschel Walker's own internal poll, what you find is that Kemp is ahead by 7, and in the Senate race, it's tied. So no matter what you're looking at, internal, not nonpartisan pollster, Democratic internal, whatever it might be, it is very clear that the governor's race is a much more lenient to the Republican Party than the Senate race, and there are tremendous implications for that decision. Because on one hand, this gives the Democratic Party a very good shot at retaining control of the U.S. Senate. If this was the 2016 elections and we saw the Georgia numbers then, you would have no chance that the Democratic Party was winning that Senate race. Raphael Warnock's own seat from 2016, he wasn't the candidate then, Johnny Isakson was the incumbent senator, and he won by 14 points across the state. 14 percentage points across the state of Georgia. Fast forward 5 years, and Georgia's special election goes to the Democrats by 2 points. That is a 16-point swing in just under 6 years. Fast forward till now, Georgia is technically supposed to be more Democratic because of the influx in population, but the national environment isn't nearly as beneficial to the Democratic Party as it once was. But still, Warnock seems to be holding out, which is keeping the Democratic Party at bay. If Georgia was a foregone conclusion, as it probably would have been in any other type of reality besides this one, the entirety of the U.S. Senate would be a question of how much do Republicans win by, but not what it is currently as to whether or not Republicans do win. Looking at the Georgia forecast here, the Democrats have about a 45% chance of victory according to the deluxe model. You go to classic, that chance jumps up to 53, and you go to light, and it jumps up even further to 56%. There's a good amount of chance that this does head into a runoff election. We will see what happens here. But regardless, some of the models say Republicans are ahead, some of the other ones say Democrats are ahead, but the point and the fact that it is even competitive in the first place is the reason why these numbers are so important. Because the fact Warnock is able to keep Herschel Walker at bay, while simultaneously in a race that's going to be on the same exact ballot, gives Brian Kemp an 85% chance of victory, Herschel Walker only a 55% chance of victory, and honestly, I disagree with this notion. Regardless, though, there is a very significant drop-off, one that has implications. That means that should the 2024 election go wrong for the Democratic Party, or right for them in Georgia, but technically wrong in terms of its governance, let's say Brian Kemp wants to instead act on decertifying the election results or sending a different slate of electors to Washington. I don't think that he would. I have more confidence in him now following the 2020 election that he would not follow through with something of that nature as I do with any other governor, Republican, Democrat, Independent, whoever it might be, who certified the election results, because that's what you do in a free and fair election such as the 2020 election. But let's say that happens. The Democratic Party obviously isn't going to be happy. In addition to that, there are laws currently happening in Georgia, ones that have been implemented today, such as an abortion ban across the entire state, that could be vetoed by a Democratic governor. But that simply isn't going to happen because voters here aren't willing to vote one way down the ballot. But honestly speaking, it could be a lot worse for the Democratic Party. Because as I have been saying, the Senate majority could be lost solely because the Democratic Party wasn't able to split ticket. Georgia isn't likely to go blue in 2022. This Senate election is the outlier, not the governor election. Even though Georgia went to Biden and was close in 2018, we have to recognize that relative to the rest of the nation, Georgia was about 4 points more Republican. And considering that the national generic ballot puts the Democratic Party in a position where they're down nationwide, Georgia should honestly be in a position where Republicans are up by an amount that Brian Kemp is. If Republicans are ahead by 1 to 2 points nationwide, and Georgia is about 4 points to the right of the nation, we shouldn't be surprised at a 5, 6, maybe 7-point margin. And that's exactly what we see in the governor's race. This Senate election is the outlier, and I honestly can't explain it. Because when you take a look at many other states, with very few exceptions, you rarely see such a significant change. You saw it happen actually in Arizona in 2018. Remember, Kristen Sinema won her election there, but in the governor's race, Doug Ducey won by 14 points statewide. Now, Arizona is a comparison that is very similar to Georgia in this aspect, but you can't really find that many other exceptions. It is really just something to be said about this crossover appeal that Raphael Warnock has maintained amongst the Georgia voters. Remind yourself that Warnock won by 2 points in the Georgia special election, despite Biden only winning Georgia by 0.2%. That's a margin here that is 10 times larger than Biden's was. Now, that makes it sound like it was a lot larger than it was, but it is very impressive that when the Democratic Party retained control of the House, won the presidency, and it was on the state of Georgia, a historically red state, to reject a Democratic trifecta, as we have seen in many circumstances. Take a look at Georgia's runoff election in 2008 that could have handed the Democratic Party a 60-seat majority. And voters said 59 is enough. We are going to completely push back on any Democrat. We won what we needed to. There's no enthusiasm here. But in the Georgia runoff election, that turnout was higher than the 2016 presidential election turnout. In addition to that, not only was that turnout higher, it gave voters an opportunity to reject a Democratic trifecta, and instead, not only did they just allow it, but they wholeheartedly waved it in by a margin larger than Biden's victory. And I think that has to do something with Warnock's ability to win. Warnock is a good candidate, and honestly speaking, Walker is not. And I think a lot of that can explain why this margin may be the way that it is. Now, I think both Warnock and I believe that Warnock and Kemp are both up in their respective races. Right now, the 538 model gives Walker a lead in this Georgia election. And I will say, I wouldn't be shocked or really even surprised should Walker win the election this November alongside Brian Kemp. But what I do think is that never really would I have expected a year and a half ago that these elections would be going in completely opposite directions. Because right now, this governor's race is on track to be a likely margin for the Republicans, while the Senate race is on track to be a lean margin for the Democrats. That rarely ever happens, and I say that in full confidence. Because knowing states such as Georgia, you'll typically see them vote together. You're not going to see much of a drop-off between Pennsylvania's Senate race and the Pennsylvania governor's race. While they might technically vote for opposing parties, they'll probably be within 3 to 4 points of each other. You're not going to see something similar to what this is expected to be, potentially an 8-point difference between the two candidates. Or the Arizona Senate and governor's race might end up in different positions. But I will say that based off the chances here, it looks like they are going to be pretty similar in terms of the expected margin. Mark Kelly's expected to win by less than 2. Carrie Lake is expected to win by less than half a point. So that difference there will be about 2 percentage points, not 8 percentage points. And what 538 is projecting, somewhere around 7 to 6 points. That difference is very substantial. And it speaks to the electability of Raphael Warnock, the unelectability of Herschel Walker, and potentially speaking, the electability of Brian Kemp and the unelectability of Stacey Abrams. Abrams was a rising star in the Democratic Party, and many people would still argue that she is. But unfortunately for her, it looks like Georgia is doing exactly what it did in 2020 and voting 4 points to the right of the nation. But luckily for Democrats, that doesn't seem to be harming them in the Senate race. Georgia isn't going in the opposite direction of where Democrats want it to go. If Warnock wins this Senate race by 1.3%, despite the national environment being 7-8 points worse for the Democratic Party, it means that Georgia has made progress and that Warnock has made real progress in the state in terms of his election. On top of that, it will mean Democrats, should they win this race, will hold both seats in Georgia until at least 2026, technically 2027, which means we would be well into the first term or the second term of President Biden, should he be reelected, or President Trump, but the first term of essentially maybe a new president in 2024, before John Ossoff's seat is up again. These Senate elections would lock down Georgia's Senate seats for the Democratic Party should they win it. And they are doing exactly what they need to do in a race that was practically unwinnable, looking at it from an outsider's perspective a year ago. If you were to give any reputable pollster or pundit the race, the state of the race by numbers, seeing that Virginia had flipped to the GOP, the state legislature there flipped to the GOP, on top of special election after special election with the exception of the Nebraska one. If you were to look at these numbers in June of 2021, or even right after Biden was inaugurated, right after Warnock's victory, and Republicans being up 2 points in the generic ballot, where Democrats were up 8 in 2020, seeing that 10-point swing, seeing Biden down to a 37% approval rating, you would immediately assume Georgia was not only an automatic pickup, but a locked down one entirely. And yet, for some reason, it isn't. Again, to reiterate, and one thing I want you to take away from this is that the Senate race is the outlier, not the governor's race. Abrams was doomed to lose the moment that Biden was inaugurated, because we knew that eventually Biden's numbers would fall. Maybe a Democrat besides Abrams would be doing better than her, but I can't say that I entirely expect that, especially knowing that Brian Kemp lucked out in 2018 when he probably wouldn't have in a different type of environment. Looking at the Georgia governor's race in 2022, I do believe that Brian Kemp is ahead by a margin that the polls are suggesting. But to see the same group of people say they would entirely re-elect Brian Kemp by 7, 9, 6 points, yet say definitively that they would also re-elect Raphael Warnock is fascinating to say the least. At the end of the day, the Democrats are the ones who should be happy about this, at least slightly, because it was probably doomed from the beginning until now, until Walker decided to be that Republican nominee, and Republicans entirely went through with it. Republicans have made numerous mistakes when it comes down to many of these governor and Senate races, but I think Georgia is one of the bigger misses, and it becomes a lot clearer in the data that we see and the numbers that we are seeing released from the state. I'm excited to see more out of the state of Georgia. I think it's going to be a very close race to watch on the Senate side. I think the governor's side, we practically know who's going to win, but then again, nothing is entirely secure. This isn't to say that Stacey Abrams can't win. A 15% chance in a red wave year is still pretty good for a state that is ultimately very much a swing state, and honestly speaking, still at heart a conservative state that swung away from Trump and the Republican Party momentarily. Republicans are likely to win it back in 2022, but we will see what happens, because this isn't an entirely written off race for Stacey Abrams, but I can't say that I'm expecting much from her at this point in time. Raphael Warnock, on the other hand, I can say I am expecting him to win this Senate race. It'll be close. It'll probably be one of the closest in the nation, maybe slightly behind the state of Nevada. We'll see what happens, though. At the end of the day, it does come down to the voters and what their preferences are, but right now it seems to be, in the state of Georgia, moving in opposite directions depending on the race. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.